Israel is preparing to do something in Rafah that will change history forever. It is planning a ground offensive, trapping the Palestinians inside it, and then wiping out all life, killing all men, women, and children. But it becomes hard to grasp given that the International Court of Justice has given a verdict for Israel to avoid acts of genocide. Well, it appears that Israel and its supporters do not care about the verdict and are comfortable with what Israel is planning to do. However, South Africa can never let that happen, no matter how far it has to go and what it has to do. Once again, it has reached the International Court of Justice, demanding immediate interference in the matter to avoid a massive slaughter of 1.4 million Palestinians living there. Until now, Rafah was the last safe zone for the people of Palestine in Gaza, but now, Israel plans to wipe it out completely. So, how does South Africa plan to avoid such a catastrophe? Let's find out. The world, including even Israel's allies, was shocked when Israel announced its plan for a ground offensive on Rafah. It meant that Israeli troops would enter the territory and carefully kill every single soul living in Rafah, a place where 1.4 million Palestinians live. Now, the situation in Rafah is rapidly escalating as Palestinians are faced with the difficult decision of whether to flee their last refuge in Gaza. It's because Israel is preparing for a ground offensive that the United Nations aid chief has warned could lead to a slaughter and a massacre. He urged Israel to take heed of the warnings from the international community regarding the serious consequences of a ground invasion, emphasizing that history will not look kindly if these warnings are disregarded. Numerous countries and international organizations are urgently urging Israel to reconsider its planned offensive, with Ireland's Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, accusing Israel of being consumed by anger. Israel has been relentlessly bombing Rafah for weeks and remains relentless for a ground offensive, viewing it as the only alternative to wiping Hamas. However, the prospect of a ground offensive has left Palestinians in Rafah feeling anxious and unsure of their next steps. On the other hand, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu instructed the military to plan for the evacuation of the population from Rafah, citing the imminent entry of the Israel Defense Forces into Hamas's last stronghold. The IDF aims to develop an evacuation strategy to move civilians out of harm's way and distinguish between civilians and Hamas militants, as outlined by spokesperson Lerner. However, the plan has not yet been presented to the government. You should know that more than 1.4 million people are currently crammed into a sprawling tent city along the Egyptian border in Rafah, serving as the only refuge of safety for Palestinians fleeing Gaza's northern and central areas. These families are already grappling with severe shortages of essential supplies and face the constant threat of Israeli airstrikes. It is in this situation that Israel plans to evacuate Rafah. Naturally, it will be most difficult for 1.4 million people coming from all over Gaza to find a safe home, to once again leave Rafah. However, Israel will once again use it as an excuse, calling them Hamas sympathizers and targeting them in killings. Residents of Rafah are now faced with a heart-wrenching choice: remain in the city and risk being trapped in a violent Israeli ground offensive, or try to escape to towns devastated by Israeli bombings, where the remaining inhabitants report resorting to desperate measures to survive. You should know that Palestinians in Rafah have endured unimaginable suffering, displacement, disease, and starvation during months of upheaval, as highlighted by the UN's Griffiths in a statement on Monday. Where can they turn? How can they stay safe? There's nowhere left in Gaza. Officials from the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, and an increasing number of countries, including the United States, European Union, United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and Qatar, have raised concerns about a potential ground offensive and its potential impact on the civilian population. However, all these concerns are only limited to words. China has urged Israel to halt its military operations, calling for them to take every possible measure to prevent civilian casualties. A spokesperson from the Chinese Foreign Ministry stated, "We oppose and condemn acts against civilians and international law." Italy's Foreign Minister, Antonio Tajani, has criticized Israel's response to Hamas as disproportionate, expressing concern about the high number of Palestinian civilian casualties. Jordan's King Abdullah II, during a White House visit, warned that a ground operation in Rafah would lead to devastation, emphasizing the need to prevent an Israeli attack on Rafah. What's more, Ireland's Prime Minister strongly denounced Israel's actions, stating that it is clear to him that Israel is not listening to any country in the world. He expressed serious concern about the risk of a massacre in Rafah and criticized Israel for being blinded by rage. The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan, announced an active investigation into any alleged crimes committed by Israel. He expressed deep concern about the reported bombardment and potential ground attack by Israeli forces in Rafah. However, everyone knows nothing will work unless South Africa joins the resistance against the Rafah offensive. That's when South Africa decided to drag Israel to the ICJ once again and make it answerable for its evil plans. South Africa has described Rafah as the last refuge for surviving people in Gaza. It contends that Israel's offensive there would constitute a serious breach of the Genocide Convention and the ICJ's previous ruling, mandating Israel to take all necessary measures to prevent genocide in Gaza. South Africa has now filed a second appeal with the International Court of Justice, seeking to halt Israel's military operations against Hamas in Gaza. The appeal specifically calls on the court to instruct Israel to refrain from launching an imminent attack on Hamas forces in Rafah, the southernmost city of the enclave. However, the IDF has a good excuse, that is to assault the 4 predominantly intact Hamas battalions stationed in Rafah along the Gaza-Egypt border. But it's quite surprising that the IDF is ignoring a massive population of 1.4 million Palestinians living in Rafah who are directly impacted. And the impacts mean getting killed, bombed, captured, tortured, and being treated as Hamas militants. Israel alleges that senior Hamas leaders, as well as Israeli hostages held by the group, are present in Rafah or within Hamas's subterranean military tunnel network beneath the city. That's a claim it cannot prove yet. However, it's still ready for the offensive. Experts expect that the same pattern would be followed. Israel would attack Rafah, bring destruction, and kill thousands of Palestinians, and then it would try to plant evidence there that could prove Hamas's presence. In other cases, Israel could shamelessly say after the attack that Hamas did not reside in Rafah. It's the same as Israel did in the case of Al-Shifa Hospital. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Africa's geopolitics, economy, and changing landscape. Let's continue now. On Tuesday, South Africa's presidency announced that the government had urgently petitioned the ICJ to evaluate whether Israel's decision to extend military activities in Rafah warrants intervention to prevent further infringements on Palestinian rights. In response, Israel has criticized South Africa, accusing it of acting as the legal arm of Hamas through its ICJ application. Israel has also highlighted what it perceives as double standards, citing South Africa's failure to address other alleged war crimes in the court, such as those attributed to the Assad regime in Syria and the Houthis in Yemen. What it really means is Israel is implicitly accepting that it's carrying a genocide. However, the complaint is why South Africa is only talking about genocide committed by Israel and not other states. While the ICJ has not yet ruled on South Africa's central claim of genocide in Gaza, it has acknowledged the Palestinians' right to protection against genocidal acts. Historically, the ICJ has granted additional emergency measures when circumstances on the ground have changed. The devastation in Gaza is severe, with around 80% of the population displaced and a humanitarian crisis pushing a quarter of Palestinians towards starvation. Yet, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remains insensitive toward Palestinians and determined to achieve total victory. However, South Africa is in no mood to allow Israel to abuse loopholes and endanger the lives of 1.4 million Palestinians. It does not want to be a country remembered in history as the one that idly witnessed 1.4 million people getting slaughtered. The South African government has expressed serious concern in its recent submission, indicating deep distress over Israel's unprecedented military offensive in Rafah, which has already caused and is expected to result in further significant loss of life, injuries, and destruction. South Africa underscored the urgency of addressing the situation, particularly in light of the daily death toll in Gaza. In response, the ICJ confirmed receiving South Africa's new request on Tuesday night without providing additional comments on what might happen. But you should know that a ruling could be anticipated within weeks if the court chooses to convene another hearing on additional provisional measures. At the same time, Israel vehemently denies accusations of genocide in Gaza, asserting its efforts to spare civilians and target only Hamas militants. Israel argues that the embedding of Hamas within civilian areas complicates efforts to avoid civilian casualties, an argument that can never justify a ground offensive in a civilian area. Israel justifies its actions as a response to the October 7th attacks in southern Israel, with the aim of dismantling Hamas. However, South Africa accuses Israel of disregarding the court's preliminary ruling by persisting in targeting civilians, with Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor stating that Israel believes it has unchecked authority. Due to South Africa challenging Israel on its every action and future plan, the world is now thinking to question Israel. Therefore, U.S. President Joe Biden recently criticized Israel's military assault in Gaza as over the top, emphasizing the necessity for a credible and executable plan to protect civilians should Israel pursue further operations against Hamas in Rafah. Now, what the ICJ will do on South Africa's latest request is to be seen because Israel is violating earlier orders and is in no mood to avoid genocide. What do you think? Will the ICJ refrain Israel from a ground offensive in Rafah? Will Israel follow ICJ's order, or will we see another slaughter in Rafah? In the comment section right below, let us know how Israel can be stopped from killing millions of Palestinians if it simply denies ICJ's orders. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: African politics, economy, and increasing power. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.
Tell us what you think in the comment section. Like and share the video, and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our African videos. It's the best way to support us.